We have about 2 minutes before our speaker starts our first session. So I wanted to say good morning. My name is Leah Gregory. I talked to a few of you at the tables. You might have talked to some of our other helpers, including Dan Bostrom, Kristen Peekle, Kate Kite, and Jessica Silva. If you have questions, you can ask any one of us those questions. Just a little bit about tables. It does not matter what table you are at currently or during sessions. The only reason you would want to switch tables is when we break for table talks. And that is a little bit later this morning. We have 2 notes to start. Just a little guidance. If you click at the top of your screen, you will see agenda, and you should be able to see the schedule for the day. And then if you are going to switch tracks later, if you're high school, you're going to stay in this room all day long. If you're middle school or elementary, you're going to switch to one of those track rooms, and you do that by going to the event map at the top of your screen, and you'll see that. But that doesn't start until 10:45. Right now, we're all in our keynote, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Christina Weber, who's going to talk to us about intellectual freedom.
Good morning, Leah. Good morning, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And get myself into presentation mode. Are you guys seeing what I want you to see?
Yes, I can see your presentation.
In presentation mode?
Not in presentation mode now. I see the slides over to the left and one slide.
Yep. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. I'm usually not in Microsoft. So it's weird for me. Okay. So I'm talking to you today about intellectual freedom. I was here for the Library Workers Symposium last year, and I noticed that there was a particular kind of thing that I mentioned when I was giving this talk, and so many people were fascinated and wanted to know more. So I tried to incorporate more of that for you today. I'd like to start out by talking about why we're all here, right? The mission really is to get good books into the hands of kids, and books that expand their worldviews and get them thinking about themselves and others, get them to be more empathetic. So all of that is really important. And when we think about intellectual freedom, it really is at the heart of that mission. It's at the heart of the mission that we are trying to fulfill in our libraries in general. Intellectual freedom is the right of every individual to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. Gives people the right to think for themselves. It respects individual dignity and self-rule, and allows people to form their own ideas and opinions. So we are dealing with just an unprecedented number of challenges in our business these days. In 2021, we talked about how it was the most we had ever seen, right, at 1858. And then 2022, it was the most we had ever seen at 2571. And then 2023, like crushed that at 4,240 banned and challenged books. And that's a really scary number. But there is a little bit of optimism hidden in that number. Bear with me here. I know that sounds crazy. 90% of that 4,240 were multiple title challenges. So that's organizations and activists sending in challenges to school districts with 100 books on them or 150 books on them. So those aren't the challenges that we usually really worry about, right? Because those are coming from a place of just dogma, and usually school districts do a really good job of seeing through that. The problem with these bans and challenges in general is that PEN America found that 40% had Black and Indigenous people of color protagonists, and 41% had LGBTQ protagonists or major plot points. So it's our most marginalized and our most at risk, not at risk, but students who have a hard time finding themselves in things anyway are the ones who are finding less books at their disposal because of bans and challenges. And we never want to see that. So I wanted to talk to you a bit today about the different laws that we have that back up what we're doing. And there are a couple of Supreme Court cases that really buttress our position and make it so that we don't have to worry so much about the position that we're taking when it comes to intellectual freedom. So the first is Tinker v. Des Moines in 1969. In that Supreme Court case, it was found that teachers and students do not give up their First Amendment rights at the school doors, which is really what intellectual freedom is all about, right? And then Island Trees Union School District v. Pico in 1982. School boards may not remove books from the school library just because they don't like the ideas contained in those books. A lot of the time you find that people call books obscene or harmful to minors, and there is an actual legal test for harmful and obscene. It's called the Miller test. It comes from Miller v. California in 1972, where they found that obscene materials are not protected by the First Amendment. However, there is a 3-part legal test to figure out what obscene or harmful to minors would mean. In that 3-point test, they're looking at prurient interest, where they're looking at the work as a whole to find out if it is only really sexual content as a whole, whether it's patently offensive. So does the material, again, as a whole, depict or describe sexual conduct in an offensive way? Does the material as a whole lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? I hope you noticed the bolding and my voice, because obscenity and harmful to minors is a really high bar. And a lot of the time when people try to ban or challenge a book, they are pulling out passages and using those teeny tiny passages as their evidence that something is obscene or inappropriate, not something you can test for, and it's not something that we look at when it comes to banning or challenging book. And it looks, you have to make sure that you're looking at the whole work as a whole. Illinois has passed a couple laws that are really helpful for us too. PA 103-0100 is the new anti-book ban law. And in that, it requires that each Illinois school adopts the Bill of Rights or puts their own policy into play that includes an anti-censorship statement. And noticed in my own district is that that has really gotten people thinking about the fact that censorship is bad, and school boards are really, it's giving them an opportunity to pay attention to that, which is really good. And then we also have 75 ILCS 70, which library records should be available to anyone but the patron unless A, there's a court order, or B, there's imminent danger of physical harm and law enforcement asks for those records. And remember, with intellectual freedom, we need absolute privacy in order for anyone to feel intellectually free and free to explore different topics and different things in the library. So privacy is hugely important to us. So in the ALA's Library Bill of Rights, there are a ton of places where censorship and intellectual freedom are at the forefront. Well, the whole thing is really about intellectual freedom, but I would highly recommend checking out ALA's Library Bill of Rights, because this is what the Illinois anti-book ban law uses as its kind of standard bearer for school districts to approve. And the tenets in the Library Bill of Rights are just really good, and really good for us to know as people who work in libraries. So the biggest problem these days is that library workers, both school librarians and circulation clerks and paraprofessionals, are finding themselves feeling really scared. That's understandable. But as people who work in libraries, this is something that we will get past. And we have to really guard ourselves against kind of being drawn in by it. And so is kind of a trend toward soft censorship. And what that is the ALA collateral censorship by a library worker, and that's in general. It's when certain books aren't purchased or from the collection in order to preemptively avoid a challenge. It especially hurts our BIPOC and LGBTQ students, and that's something that we really want to think about. And it undermines the high standards and ambitions we hold ourselves to as stewards of intellectual freedom. So it's just something that we want to make sure that we're aware of and that we're holding ourselves back from. I'm noticing in the chat that that my school announcements that I can't mute are bothering some of you, and I apologize for that. And also that I might be having internet problems. I'm in Hampshire, so out here in Hampshire, that tends to happen. So I apologize for that too. So I want to talk a little bit about best practices. All right, they're done, so that's good. Collection development best practices. Collection development is an art and a science, and we as librarians train for it, and we follow collection development policies and procedures. So there is a method to collection development that I think we can fall back on and feel protected by. Weeding should always be done to crew and musty standards so that we're watching ourselves to make sure that we're not weeding out of fear or to avoid conflict. Remember, having a process to things is always protection. You guys are cracking me up. I have a fire drill tomorrow. So yes, thank God it's not a fire drill. Privacy, we need to remember that student circulation records are private. Circulation history should not be shared with teachers. Overdue notices should be emailed to students and not their parents whenever possible. And the only people who should have access to patron data are those who work in the library. So action items for you to think about. If you have books labeled to restrict access, unlabel them. Labeling is a form of censorship according to the ALA. If you've shared out histories with teachers, we don't want to do that. That does violate Illinois library privacy law, and we never want to share a student's circulation history with anyone. You'll want to familiarize yourself with your district selection and reconsideration policies. We all have them. And if it's not robust, there are a couple of toolkits that I linked to at the end of this presentation that would help you with that. Leah, I'll try to get the presentation to you today so that you can include that. And then rehearse when in difficult situations. There are great talking points and scenarios you can use to prepare. And I'll link to some of those too. I say that a process is protection, preparation is protection too, and making sure that we kind of understand the kinds of things people will come to us with, and then know what we would say in those situations will help us so much. Another thing that heartens me with the 4240 number is that so far this year, knock on wood, ALA is reporting that that number is on trend to go down this year. So we may have hit the apex last year, and hopefully we're kind of seeing a downward trend now. So intellectual freedom books have been kind of the hot issue in librarianship over the last couple of years. I am very hopeful that it'll kind of just become what we've always known pretty soon here. So a couple of things to remember. No book is appropriate for every reader, but every book is appropriate for someone. And something that I've always, that I heard Giannulia say it in front of Congress last year, and I was like, yes, somebody's talking to him and telling him the right things to say. It's perfectly reasonable for a parent to decide whether a book for their child, it is, but it's not okay for them to make that decision for other people's children. And that's something to always keep in mind too. Soft censorship when it comes to dealing with challenges and dealing with angry parents, all of that. If a parent calls you or complains about a book, says that there was, I'll use an example on the listserv yesterday, there was too much swearing in the book, then, you know, great, you know, I get it, that book's not for your kid, bring it back, we'll find something perfect for him. And remember that work, we're all proud to be a part of it. Like I said, it's the mission. It is what we're all here for. You aren't alone. Reach out if you need support. And I want to show you real quick ISLE's Intellectual Freedom Resource Center. Let's see if I need to reshare here to be able to show you this. Yep. Okay. No, not that. Sorry. This. So in the Intellectual Freedom Resource Center, you've got a lot of really good resources, a lot of things that you can rely on if you need support, if you're looking for support. There are people to contact, including me. Oh, Deb, I need to update that, don't I? And the Unite Against Book Bans book resumes are right here. We've got ISLE's position statement on banned and challenged books, and then a ton of intellectual freedom resources that I have compiled throughout the years of being in this position as ISLE's Intellectual Freedom Chair that hopefully will help you. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yeah. Amy, that's a really good question, because the Illinois Library Privacy Law doesn't take that into consideration. So I've had a lot of conversations with ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom about that exact issue. How do we manage the younger kids? And ALA believes that the privacy law is probably not enforceable under the age of 12. So if you need to get parents involved under the age of 12, then that's understandable. But use your judgment. If you've got a kid who's obviously trying to discover things that that they'd want kept private, then, you know, just use your best judgment on that.
Christina, there's a question in the chat that I wanted to chime in with, because we are seeing a lot of this with the school boards and administrators who are afraid to adopt that policy because they're afraid it's going to invite scrutiny of their collection. Mm-hmm. So their collection, they already feel, is fairly diverse, but by adopting that policy, they're afraid they're going to draw attention. And I've been telling people, if you can't talk about it, you already have a problem, but I just would love to hear your input on that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that those numbers that I said at the beginning are really the reason that these school board members and superintendents are scared, right? Because this issue has gotten totally out of hand. It's insane. Our Democratic leadership in Springfield felt comfortable making a statement with this law, right? And in some of our more rural communities, perhaps they wouldn't feel, perhaps we don't feel as comfortable to make that same statement right now, when we've got over 4,000 banned and challenged books in the country over the last year. So where does that leave us? Basically, that leaves your school board leaving money on the table. So you won't be eligible for the Illinois library grant, right? And that's painful. That's really painful, especially for those of us with smaller budgets. I think that right now, while this is still such a hot button issue, it might be hard in some of those communities to get this added to board policy. And we can only do what we can do, right? Like, we can't force the board or the superintendent to take up this issue. We can strongly suggest it, but if they don't feel comfortable doing that, then there's nothing we can do about that. They're going to leave money on the table, and they have to be okay with that. I think that since we saw an apex last year, hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll see perhaps less of this issue in the news. And then some of these school boards and superintendents will feel more comfortable slipping that into board policy so that they're eligible for that grant again. So it's a hard fact of life. And we all know that having a policy like this on the books is the best option. But again, you can only do what you can do. You have to worry about you too. Would you agree with that, Leah?
I would agree with that. And I said, that's exactly what I said. You have, like she was saying, he wants to wait until a non-election year, and they've already come this far without it. So, I mean, as long as they're comfortable leaving money on the table, you're kind of, I mean, and I always say, live to fight another day. So you don't want to die on the hill that's going to make it impossible for you to make books available to kids at all. So.
Exactly. This is exactly, Dan. Step one, don't get fired. Like, this is our livelihoods too. And we have to be able to exist within whatever district framework we're in. And I don't know. I'm an idealist at heart, but I'm also a realist. So
one thing I will say, just to keep in mind, is that the Illinois Association of School Boards did create a policy that meets this law, and it's very simple, very not incendiary at all. So I don't think it's going to start any talk. So if your school board is comfortable adopting policy from that entity, that has made it so much easier for many of my small and rural schools to adopt this policy, because it comes down from our policymakers, and so we're going to adopt it. So you can argue that.
And the district attorneys get this email from this school board policy, these policy wonks, basically, who tell them exactly what that language should look like. And then they add it, usually with no fanfare. You might actually already have that policy in your school board policy and you didn't even realize, because the district attorneys will just add it to the agendas and they'll just pass it through and nobody pays attention to it. So all of that is way above our pay grade though. And so again, you can suggest, but you can't force.
Okay, thank you so much, Christina. We appreciate you coming to talk so much. we have obviously tons of questions, so we could talk about this all day long. So unfortunately, we can't spend all day on this topic, even though I was just at a conference that spent 2 entire days on this topic. And there was still more we could have talked about. So we could talk about it forever. So one thing I want to emphasize is Dan put it in the chat that your system is there to help you. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to myself if you're in the southern or southern part of the state, or Jessica Silva if you're in the northern part of the state, or if you know anybody at your system already that you can reach out to, feel free to reach out and we will connect you with some resources. The other thing is that we are going to record this session, and so you can come back to any section of this and see it again if you have any questions. We are also going to maintain, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but last year we started a listserv right after the symposium, and people were able to come and talk about this on the listserv by exchanging ideas. So we will have areas where you can just bring up questions and things like that that you thought of. So Dan is saying, yes, we're going to do that. So we have a listserv, and you can have access to that after the event today. Michelle, I will put my contact information into the chat. But you can also just go to Illinois Heartland Library System or Reaching Across Illinois Library System's websites. Okay, so that is our first keynote, and I thank Christina Weber so much. I always enjoy hearing what she has to say about intellectual freedom. We are going to switch gears now and switch to Standards and Advocacy for School Libraries. And we have Sia Paganes and Amanda O'Rourke talking to us today.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear us, everyone? I hope so.
Can I interrupt with one thing? I forgot to say this. I know that it's very important to all of you to get your PD hours, your PDH for today. So I will put a link in the chat to the form that you need to fill out for the entire day. And then I will also make sure that I send it out via email afterwards. So don't worry, you will definitely get PDH for today. Okay, take it away. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. We're switching gears a little bit, and we are going to talk about some teaching standards for libraries. And I think, Amanda, are you able to share the presentation?
I am. I just put the link in the chat to our presentation if you want to follow along on your computer. I know during the last session, a couple people were saying you couldn't see the slides and things. So if you want to open that up, there's also a link in there to the Google Drive folder shared by Isle in case you wanted to look at the standards specifically. I am working right now on presenting my screen so that you guys can see our presentation as well.